Hello and welcome to the Holyrood Sources podcast, where we take you inside Scottish politics. I'm Calum Macdonald. Hello. And here's Geoff Aberdein, who was Chief of Staff to the First Minister, Salmond. Hello, Geoff.
Good morning.
And Andy Maciver, who was Director of Communications for the Scottish Conservatives. Hello, Andy.
Good morning. Hello.
Great to have you both here, guys. This is our first of 2 episodes this week, just to let you know. So we're recording this one on Wednesday, as usual, but tomorrow, on the 15th, we're recording a special conversation with Michael Shanks, who's a Labour MP for Rutherglen and, of course, an Energy Minister as well. That will drop into your feed on Friday morning. So subscribe to the podcast now on whatever app you're listening. You can do that for free, or if you want to never hear the ads again, subscribe on Apple Podcasts. It's only $4.99 a month, and in fact, you don't even have to pay that right now because there's a free trial running, so you can see what it's all about. Have a little look on Apple Podcasts if that interests you. Just a quick email, first of all, from Kenneth. After last week's episode where we were looking at the programme for government, he says one part of the PFG that received less attention was the commitment to publish single authority models for Nechillen and Anir, Orkney and Argyll and Bute, along with an implementation timeline for these. This is moving more towards the Nordic model, says Kenneth, of having democratically elected local bodies responsible for public healthcare delivery, though would appear to go in the opposite direction to Scottish Labour's plans for fewer NHS boards. With reports that there's increasing interest in the single authority model among Scotland's urban local authorities, should this be a new Scotland-wide model, with most healthcare and public health being the responsibility of integrated local authorities, augmented by a few regional NHS boards running strategic hospital sites? Asks Kenneth. Andy, what do you reckon?
Yes, it was in there. It has been talked about quite a bit. I have to say, I would commend people to look back in their feed, probably, I don't know, maybe even 18 months to when we had Andy Whiteman on the podcast. Andy's a bit of an authority himself, and a bit of a single authority himself, in fact, on decentralisation generally. And actually, that's what the big issue here is decentralisation. There are lots of major systemic problems in Scotland, and most of them arise from how centralised Scotland has become since devolution. So devolution's actually led to a centralisation within Scotland from local to national, and that's a part of the problem. So this single island model, a single authority model, I should say, will work in some places, but will not work in all. The idea is that obviously you amalgamate services around a local authority, health, education, transport, that sort of thing. And in some places, as I say, that will be successful and logical, and in other places it won't work quite so well. So I think the key to this is to be reasonably flexible and reasonably bespoke about going about this. But it's a big issue, and not only is it a big issue in terms of restructuring local authorities, it's a big issue in terms of potentially restructuring health, education, transport and the economy, which are probably the 4 biggest issues that we have.
Thanks, Andy. You can email us hello@holyroodsources.com, of course, or you can WhatsApp us. The number on WhatsApp is 0333 404 6507. Right, let's get into the episode then. A bill proposing the legalisation of assisted dying in Scotland has successfully passed its first vote in the Scottish Parliament. The proposed legislation would grant terminally ill adults with mental capacity the option to seek medical assistance to end their lives. MSPs voted 70 to 56 in favour of the bill's general principles, and so it now goes through 2 further stages of parliamentary review before it would become law. Geoff, in terms of this, it was a free vote, and that's provoked a lot of conversation about how high quality that made the debate. The MSP's contributions were personal and passionate and respectful in a way that perhaps differs to, in inverted commas, normal parliamentary procedure.
Yeah, and I think that was the right thing to do given the subject at hand. I thought it was a very emotive debate, and I thought all politicians actually stood up and were counted in terms of offering their own personal experiences and why they were going to vote in a certain direction. And I thought the Parliament stood itself in good stead yesterday.
Andy, what's your take on that? Is that right? Is it because it's a free vote, and it almost makes you kind of long for everything to be conducted in this way, doesn't it?
A bit, yes. So I think it was partly because it was a free vote, and I think it partly makes you want everything to be conducted in this way. I've been following, I should say, Message Matters as a client with interests in this, so we've been obviously following it quite closely. I think it's probably, I've been in and around the Parliament for almost all of its existence. It's probably the best of the Parliament, not just in this session. It might be the best I've ever seen the Parliament, actually. And I think it's partly because it was a free vote. I think it's partly because the subject matter demanded a level of scrutiny. And I think that people actually showed not only the Parliament in the best light, but showed themselves in the best light as well. That doesn't always happen, let's face it. When politicians are whipped and when they're on more tribal subjects, they don't often make the best fist of themselves. They don't often give the best advert for themselves. And actually, a lot of people who you heard yesterday made really powerful, very intelligent contributions, and they don't always, frankly, and they did yesterday. So I think obviously the issue is the issue, and that will now go on. That's stage one. So there's some way to go in that, and that will now rumble on. But I do think we should be looking at how we can do some other things differently, given what we heard yesterday. Think about some of the debates that we've had in the Parliament over recent times. Gender's an obvious one, but actually, even if you look at the bigger actual policy areas, like, for example, tax, like energy policy, if we think about the way that people spoke and behaved yesterday and the work they had put into researching their topics yesterday, if you applied that to some of these other policy areas, would we be in the sort of situation that we're in? Not so sure. Now, I'm not saying it's an advert for free votes all the time, because structure and parties and whipping is actually really important. You have chaos if you don't have that. So you can't just have it all the time. But I do think it gives us an interesting window into what might be possible if there's just a little bit more freedom, not even freedom to vote your own way all the time, but at least freedom to give an opinion that might be slightly different to what the whips want you to.
You've both had experience of preparing MSPs to speak on stuff, on issues in Parliament or elsewhere. And so, Geoff, I was going to ask you about this. How easy or difficult that is, because I can imagine it's not dissimilar to my own job. You have to get interested in stuff. You have to research stuff. You have to know what you're talking about. And actually, as Andy says, with the assisted dying legislation, MSPs have spoken about how much correspondence they've had from constituents for a start. They've almost had to deliberately sit down and think about it and work through the arguments themselves to then be able to say them out loud. I just wonder if some of these steps are sometimes missing in the kind of debate process that we usually witness.
Yeah, I think that's right. The advisors would not have had any role in terms of for the government or indeed for the MSPs in telling people what to say, MSPs what to say. And I think that was the glory of this. I mean, I think Andy's right. You can't do it on every subject, but when it is carried out on issues that are emotive like this, then it's going to be you're going to get personal experiences.
Andy, when we look at what Liam MacArthur said, who was the MSP who brought this bill, the Lib Dem MSP, and we'll hear from him in just a second, actually, and some of what he said in Parliament yesterday. He said he wanted it to pass its first stage to then permit further debate, even if MSPs had concerns about the specifics of the proposals. And I just wonder if you think that is a kind of sensible approach to parliamentary process, that actually, let's get it past this bit, there's further scrutiny to come. Whereas it could be concerning to some of our listeners, I suppose, to hear that. Why can't MSPs just make the choice now to say, I don't want this, shut it down, I don't want further debate? I'm just trying to work out the validity of that as an approach.
And I think 56 of them did. So,
sure.
That what Liam had asked them to do, I think, is a perfectly sort of reasonable tactic to try to ensure that your bill gets passed at stage one. And in terms of parliamentary procedure, that is, of course, exactly what this is. You pass a bill at stage one, and then it gets significant scrutiny at stage two. We've seen that. We see that with legislation all the time. The land reform bill just got passed a couple of weeks ago, and it's in a total mess. And so it's got a massive stage two process to go through before that gets figured out. So I mean, I think that in this case, actually, it's even more important that, stage 2 process is critically important in this stage, because that's when you get to the point where you see what the actual final bill and final proposals look like. So I thought it was pretty reasonable to do that, and those who are just not going to be in support of this full stop, irrespective of what comes at stage 2, are able to vote against it. And as I say, they did vote against it. And those who are either going to be in favour full stop, or I suppose in this context, more importantly, those who have got an open mind on it and are probably minded to support it, but still want to be reassured and want a bit more, that's what stage 2 is for. So, I think that was a perfectly normal and proper use of parliamentary process and the process of a bill.
That's reassuring. And Geoff, just a final one then on this before we hear from some of the MSPs. I think it's important that we play actually some of the arguments of the MSPs during the 5 hours of debate yesterday. We'll get to that in just a second. I suppose the other kind of cynical, sceptical side of this is a lack of confidence that the Parliament can get something like this right. The examples that are cited are the named person scheme, the gender recognition reforms, of course, kind of notoriously now at this point, and whether Parliament can handle stuff of this magnitude.
Yeah, I think, those criticisms are fair. There's been, quite frankly, a series of shambolic legislative measures in Holyrood of late. This is an opportunity to rectify that. But bear in mind that whatever happens out of this vote, there's going to be people hugely disappointed. And I suppose the big thing here is to respect an opposing view held, and to hold that grace and dignity lasts throughout the course of this legislative process.
So then a couple of your tweets this morning. We ask on Twitter every Wednesday for your thoughts on one of the issues we're going to be talking about. Leslie says, I believe it's an individual choice where condition is such that this remains the only option, that is assisted dying, but the safeguards need to be in place to avoid the route Canada has taken, says Leslie. And Fraser says there's work to be done to it, but I do think those who are terminally ill and nearing death should be able to choose to die in dignity if they have the mental capacity to do so. Of course, we'll continue to follow the progress of that bill through Parliament. You can continue to have your say on the podcast as well. We will discuss it more in the weeks and months to come. You can email hello@holyroodsources.com. Andy, can I ask you just about the timing of all of this as well? Because we've got less than a year to go now till the next Scottish parliamentary election. And so there are questions about whether the process will actually conclude, whether the bill will either become law or will fall before next year's election. Presumably, you would think the Scottish Government would probably like it to conclude by this time next year.
I think the anticipation is that, like with the other bills that are going through at the moment, because similar questions are being asked on a variety of different bills, including government bills and member bills, but the anticipation is that bills that are going through right now, including this one, will conclude before the Parliament shuts down for the elections next April or May. So I think that is what would be anticipated, yeah.
Okay, now a recent Survation poll commissioned by True North Advisors, Geoff's firm, indicates that Reform UK would overtake Labour to become the second largest party in the Scottish Parliament if an election were to be held today. The survey projects Nigel Farage's party as being slightly ahead of Labour in terms of representation at Holyrood. According to polling expert Professor Sir John Curtis, the SNP would fall to 58 seats. Reform UK would be in second place with 21 seats. And my question actually for both of you is, with these numbers in mind, which party leader has got the most to think about in all of that? Who should be most concerned? Is it John Swinney? Is it Anas Sarwar? Is it Russell Finlay? Is it someone else? Geoff?
Anas Sarwar. We've used Survation throughout whenever we do polls for some time now, and a year ago Labour were on track to be the largest party in this polling series. So the fact that they're now on this poll coming third place means that he's got the most to lose by definition. With a health warning, I would say it was polled in the immediate aftermath of the local election results in England, and so there might be a little bit of an immediate bounce for Reform, but nonetheless, I mean, the challenge is quite clear. And we've seen Keir Starmer and the Labour Party try to respond to that. I thought, I can't remember who it was this week, but one politician posted Nigel Farage is not in office, but he's in power. And there's no doubt he's dictating political discourse in the UK just now.
Yeah, and Andy, the reference there is to Sir Keir Starmer's immigration proposals, I think, which were announced earlier in the week this week. Is it stuff like that is going to help Anas Sarwar out? I mean, is it him that has to be most concerned at this point?
Yeah, and Anas Sarwar can't do anything to help himself out because he's not put himself in the problem. The problem has been created by circumstance and by what's going on at Westminster. I don't think Keir Starmer's immigration announcement is going to help Anas Sarwar out. I don't think it's going to help Keir Starmer out either, because the reality is when you follow Farage and when you follow the Reform vote, you're not actually getting those Reform voters back. All you're doing is moving the window of debate further towards that, and people aren't going to choose the party that's had a chance to do this before. They're going to choose the party that hasn't had the chance and says it's going to fix it, and that's Farage. So I think undoubtedly with this poll, there's not really much question, I don't think, in my mind, that Anas Sarwar is the one who should be most concerned, because he's the person who's gone from measuring up the curtains in Butte House less than a year ago to now not only not becoming First Minister, but potentially, according to this poll, coming third. Although, as Geoff mentioned, I think there are health warnings here, and I think one of them is seat extrapolation. I actually have to say I don't particularly expect Reform to get the 21 odd seats that this poll said they were going to get. I think that's a little bit hot. I think it's an accurate measurement of sentiment right now, but I'm not convinced that's what the sentiment will be come the election. And I think although Reform will do perfectly well and will disrupt for sure, I don't think they're going to end up on 21 seats, and I don't think they're going to end up as the second largest party.
Actually, we've got a by-election in the next few weeks, of course, as well, in Scotland. Actually, I saw a report this morning that the SNP wants the candidates for the by-election in the Hamilton by-election to have a TV debate. I don't know. I don't think that's necessary. Do you, Geoff? Is that an important part of this by-election?
It happens quite a lot, actually. I mean, it's not unheard of. Scotland Tonight on STV have done that before at by-elections, so interesting. I don't know enough about the candidates to know if it's a good idea for the SNP to be doing that, saying that or not. I generally don't know.
It would seem more sensible for them to have a podcast debate, I would have thought, rather than a TV debate. I don't see why that.
Yeah, it's very good.
Can I just return to the Starmer thing for a second?
Yeah.
I thought the choice of phrase of an island of strangers was fascinating to me, because that phrase was deliberately put in. I mean, Keir Starmer's not a stupid guy, he's a KC, and as presumably advisors aren't either. They were doing that for maximum impact, and that was to demonstrate in quite tough language. There was comparisons made with Enoch Powell's famous Rivers of Blood speech, that they were trying to fight back on this immigration issue. And I suppose the question I have in my head is, does trying to reform work? Or are you just playing into Nigel Farage's hands? Are the people saying, oh, well, Starmer finally gets it, this is all great, for those who are that way persuaded? Or are they saying, well, basically he's just panicking and responding to the threat of Nigel Farage? So I just wonder how Labour MPs, MSPs, parliamentarians across the board are feeling about this kind of knee-jerk reaction.
Did you see the YouGov polling on this? Tory, Labour, Lib Dem and Reform voters all back Starmer on the island of strangers argument. Which of the following comes closest to your view? And it's broken down by party affiliation. But overall, I agree with the sentiment and take no issue with the language. 41%. I agree with the sentiment but don't think the language was appropriate. 12%. So do you think, I mean, this has got to have been focus grouped, to the nth degree in order to get that language in there, do you reckon?
Of course, there's a strategy behind it, and they're listening to their own focus groups, and they'll no doubt understood that phrase was going to work. The point I'm making politically is, does it give you the credit, or does it give your opponents the credit? In this case, Nigel Farage. I mean, only time will tell, but
yeah.
I guess in Scotland, where it is less of a front of house issue, in the sense that we do have a requirement for skilled workers and talent to come into this country. And I know that's a different argument to illegal immigration, asylum seekers, all the rest of it. But it's never polled as strongly up here. And so again, you asked at the outset who's got most to lose. You'd feel that Anna Sarwar would in this instance. But I just find it so fascinating that you know, a guy with a handful of MPs in Westminster is dictating the terms of discourse in the UK.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, just to briefly add to that as well, because you mentioned polling, and specifically YouGov polling, there was a YouGov poll out last week which asked people what coalitions at Westminster they would like to see, on the basis that it looks like there could be 3 large parties and the Lib Dems, so 3.5 large parties. Which coalition would you like to see? Tory voters and Reform voters, maybe not surprisingly, would like a coalition with each other. Labour voters would like a coalition with either the Lib Dems or the Greens. This only leads one way, which is that Starmer is moving the debate into a place which actually just makes it more likely that he'll be out of government in 3 or 4 years' time. Because the parties that are going to come together ultimately are going to be the Tories and Reform. And between the two of them, they'll almost certainly have a majority in 2029. This doesn't work for Starmer. It's the wrong direction to move in.
Fascinating. Can I put a final question to you from Jack on email? It's just a thought provoker. He says, this year's polls, local election results, etc., have come out with nationalist parties in Wales, Scotland and England all coming out on top. My question is, if the SNP win a majority next year, if Plaid Cymru win in Wales and Reform UK win in 2029, should the 3 leaders of each country get round the table, call the UK quits and end the union, given the individual countries' rise in the Welsh, Scottish, English nationalism question? If it went to a UK-wide vote, I think dissolving the union in favour of 3 independent countries would win if this current trend in polling and results continues. Who wants Andy? What do you think of the hypothetical from Jack on email?
Like most hypotheticals, the hypothetical is quite sound, really, in that, yeah, of course, if countries diverge, if countries continue to diverge in various different ways, then you make the prospect of secession more likely. Yeah, for sure. That doesn't mean it's actually going to happen, to be honest with you. It also makes federalism more likely, which has always been the outcome that I have supported, unlike Geoff's favoured outcome of independence. So, but yes, if you create, or if divergence is created, then of course you make that sort of split more likely. But there's quite a lot of water to flow under the bridge, and in none of those countries mentioned is there a majority for independence.
Geoff?
Yeah, I think the biggest health warning to what the question that's been asked is that in Scotland, which we're primarily here to discuss, is that the SNP vote is still down from its 2021 election result. Now, that was a huge high watermark, but nonetheless, the vote is still down. It's the fact that the Reform splitting the Unionist vote that's seeing the SNP win by such a high margin. So I think that would be the tricky part to try and explain away if you're going to move directly for independence, which is why the independence referendum of 2014 consented and agreed to was the gold standard in terms of how you move this debate forward.
Geoff and Andy, thank you both very much, and thank you for your emails and your messages. Of course, you can get in touch with those anytime. The email address is hello@holyroodsources.com, or you can WhatsApp us 0333 404 6507. We're spoiling you this week. This is episode 1 of 2. Subscribe to the podcast, and on Friday, dropping into your feed will be Energy Minister Michael Shanks. Make sure you listen out for that, and we'll talk to you then.